It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 249, and we are in February of 2018, and I am about to get 6 to 12 inches of snow over the next 3 days. So, yay, Chicago. I guess I need to find that summer or the warm weather place to stay during the winter. I don't know. As I get older, I like the snow and the cold less and less, but maybe that's just me. A lot of things going on in the show today. Later on, we'll have our interview with ORAC, whose blog is Respectful Insolence, and he's also part of the Science-Based Medicine blog. I think I have that right name. I don't know why. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what is a health savings account. We're going to talk about long-term bonds, give you a little update on that. We're going to talk about the stock market jitters that are coming up, and going to discuss a little bit a listener email about a show I did a couple weeks ago about 12-year stock market performance, and a question they had, which is a great question. I have some of the smartest listeners anywhere, so it's good to be challenged and sometimes corrected. In this case, it was just a clarification question, so we'll go over that a little bit. But the thing I want to start with is that long-term bond. Probably a month ago, give or take, I did a review of how things went in 2017, just for a reference point for the listeners. I don't know exactly which show that is. I don't know. Yeah, probably. Oh, yeah, here it is. Show number 245. So if you want to hear all the details of what all the segments did, if you didn't listen to it, go back to 245 and you can hear all that information. One of the things that I mentioned was that in the short run, I've been wrong about the Vanguard Long-Term Treasury Bond Index Fund, because long-term bonds, in my opinion, are at great risk of significant losses if interest rates go up. Now, generally speaking, when bond values go up, interest rates go down, or when interest rates go down, bond values go up. There's that weird correlation. And what causes that? Well, the short-term rate, the overnight rate, is controlled kind of, sort of, by the Fed, and they have significant control, but not absolute control over that rate. The long-term rate is much more reliant on market forces and market demands, and is generally higher interest rate on long-term bonds than on short-term bonds, because if I can make 4% today in a one-year bond, why would I make 3% in a 10-year bond and tie up my money? I could just buy the short-term bond and then next year buy another short-term bond, and then the next year buy another short-term bond. So generally, the longer you tie up your money or the more risk you take, the higher interest rate you expect and that you want as an investor. On rare occasions, long-term rates can be lower than short-term rates, and that's called a yield curve inversion. We are not at that point, and I don't think we're going to get to that point, but if that happens, short-term interest rates could be higher than long-term interest rates, which is a fascinating thing. I don't know what you do with that information, but it's kind of cool. So I guess if long-term interest rates go to something closer to a premium you would expect compared to short-term rates, the value of those bonds could fall. I know we talk about it a lot, but it's often new information to a lot of people, so forgive me if it's becoming repetitive. And just send me an email, and I'll skip it for a while. But long-term bonds, if the interest rates go up a couple percentage points, and you're in a portfolio or you own a specific bond that lasts 20 years, you can lose 20, 30, 40% while getting a 3 to 4% interest per year. So it can have a very significant negative effect in your portfolio. And since I use bonds in the cushion generally for safety, I'm not using long-term bonds. So I talked about how in 2017, the long-term bond index from Vanguard did make something like 7 or 8%, which was a big surprise to me because long-term bond rates fell only a little bit, but they did fall, and plus you had the interest. Well, now that we have concerns over tax cuts for the wealthy primarily, although the average person might save $1.50 a paycheck, which would be enough for a Costco membership. Yes, that's a joke because of Paul Ryan. The effect for most people is pretty damn small. For the wealthy, they get big tax cuts. And it now looks like this could cause a huge increase in the debt and the deficit. I mean, who could have seen that coming? When you dramatically reduce your revenue as a government, you're surprised now, apparently, that you're going to have deficits. It's amazing to me. But with an increase in deficit, what the government has to do is issue more bonds. And when the government issues bonds, there's a bidding process where people say, I will buy the bonds at this price, or I will accept this amount of interest. Well, when you sell more and more and more bonds to attract more buyers, you end up paying higher interest rates because the bidding prices, the first people get awarded, then the prices drop. And when the prices drop, the yield goes up. So you have the effect of, if the government has to issue more bonds, that tends to push the rates up. And if people are concerned now that the United States government is dysfunctional, I mean, more dysfunctional than historically dysfunctional, and that there's a potential long-term systemic problem with deficits and debts where the amount owed each year has doubled or tripled based on this tax cut, they're going to want a little bit more premium on those bonds. And that effect has started to take place. So this is a really long way of me pointing out that that fund that I had been warning against, and all long-term bonds in general, has year to date, since the beginning of the year 2018 into now February 8th, when I'm recording this, it has lost 6% in about 5 weeks. So a 6% loss on a bond fund in 5 weeks. I don't know if that will continue, if it'll bounce back, but it's something I'm very concerned about, and why I've been recommending, and why I still recommend, that you should definitely not have long-term bonds, and you probably shouldn't have intermediate-term bonds. And so I'm talking about bond funds with duration or average maturity above 5 or 6 years. So that's one thought, something I wanted to cover. Another thing is real basic health savings account, and maybe I'll go into more detail later, but someone asked me recently, should they have a FSA or an HSA? An FSA is a flexible savings account. An HSA is a health savings account. Well, all things being equal, and they almost never are, I would recommend the health savings account, the HSA. A couple of reasons. One, an HSA, you can generally put considerably more money into it if you qualify, and you don't lose the money at the end of the year. This is one of the big problems, and one of the reasons I would stay away from the flexible spending account, the FSA. It is a way to set aside money. Both of these are ways to set aside money for future future medical bills, and you get to avoid taxes on the money you put into these accounts. If you put $2,000 in the flexible spending account, but only spend $1,800, at the end of the year, the other $200 is lost. You give it back to the government. So I'm not a real big fan of FSA, but you may not qualify for an HSA. To have an HSA, your employer generally has to provide you the option of having a high deductible insurance program, which I think, and I didn't check the rules on this, so double check before you do anything. You have to have something like a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 personal or family deductible before you can qualify for an HSA. And you can put thousands of dollars in there, and it is deductible from your taxes. And the follow-up question this person had was, well, let's assume I could put $5,000 in there every year. should I do that every year for the next 5, 10, 20 years? And that becomes another way to invest with tax-deferred money. I'm not really keen on the idea, although theoretically that would work just fine. Typically, health savings accounts don't have a good cost structure. So the funds have higher expense ratios, and there's often fees associated with maintaining that account, paperwork fees, quarterly document fees, things like that. And part of the reason for that is that the companies that hold, the custodians that hold these accounts, know that most people are going to have only a few $1,000s in there. Maybe some crazy people get 10 or 20, and there's that extreme person that gets 100,000 or more. But for most people, it's several thousands. So they're limited on how much money they can make. So they have to charge a little bit more on the money that's there. The other thing is there's often a lot of transactional activity. Most people will put several $1,000s in an HSA account and during the year pull out several $1,000s from the HSA to cover medical bills. If you don't have medical bills, the account can grow. Or if you choose to pay your medical bills with taxable money and let this account grow, it could become significant when you get a little older or in retirement and you have bigger medical bills. That's true. It can work that way. But I think maybe you're focusing too hard on some little teeny thing and not more on your big picture. So the HSA is a nice way to put a several $1,000s in. Generally, I recommend once you get to $5,000 or $6,000 buffer, you can choke back a little bit on how much you put in the HSA and make sure that you've maxed out your 401k. If you're married, make sure you max out your spouse's 401k if they have one. Max out your IRAs or Roth IRAs if you have them. And then you get to the position where maybe you might actually be better off putting the money into a taxable account where you have control and flexibility instead of the HSA. But now, we're getting pretty far along into the minutia of your plan, and maybe your better choice might be the HSA, but probably not. So that's a little bit about what an HSA is. The next topic is in relationship to something I did in show 247, just 2 weeks ago, about 12-year performance. Now, the first thing I want to do is try to give a caveat that I hopefully did when I did the show 2 weeks ago. This information is just for, exploratory purposes. We're just thinking about the big picture, considering, and it's not precise. It may not work this way in the future. It kind of contains back-tested data or looking back data, which can be very dangerous to rely on. So with all those caveats and strings attached, it was just something to look at in a general sense. And I had 4 different ways one could have invested over the last 12 years. And this was someone who had $1 million to start with and was in retirement and wanted to take out about 5% to start with anyway. And we stuck with the 5% or the $50,000 every year. So you have $1 million, you take out $50,000 a year. What could happen? And all those details, like I said, I'm not going to go over it again, was in show 247. And I had 4 different ideas. One was the total stock market index in the U.S. You're fully exposed to stocks 100%. If the market goes up, you make a ton. If the market goes down, you lose a ton. High volatility. Theoretical highest maximum return if there's not an extended down period, because taking out 5% per year, if there's a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year down period, can be pretty devastating to your portfolio. So you're taking on a lot of risk. Not something I recommend, but I wanted to include it. I also had the incredibly simplified version. I think it was the target date retirement fund of 2015, which again is not bad. It's simplistic. It's easy to do. You just take out 50 grand. You only own one thing. I have some concerns because you lack the flexibility. The target date fund will have all kinds of bonds, including the long-term bonds we talked about earlier in the show. So I have concerns with that you might get underperformance. And even if only 30 or 40 or 50% of that fund is in stocks, if you have a big down year like 2008 or back in the 2000s, you're still pulling out $50,000 at a loss. So not in love with that. Another plan that I called simplistically, and maybe this has been used before, I don't think it's original for me, was the three-legged stool, where you have three different mutual funds, total international, total U.S. stock, and total bond. And every year you rebalance, you take out 50 grand, you rebalance to a fixed amount, and that works out too. And then there's what the email writer, I think, called it was the Polaris plan. So fine, we have the target date fund plan, we have the total stock market plan, we have the three-legged stool plan, and we have the Polaris plan. And the Polaris plan is much more complicated. So there's a drawback with that. But you have different bond funds, different types of bond funds, international bonds, domestic bonds, short-term bonds, Ginnie Mae bonds, high yield, aka junk bonds, and sometimes intermediate and long-term bonds, although not today in 2018. And then you also have all the different segments of the U.S. stock market. You have international, you have real estate, and you have all these different things. And whatever has kind of done the best over the last year is where you take the cash out from. So the $50,000 you need, you take the cash out from. It turned out that the absolute best performance was the total stock market index. Even with taking money out, and even with 2018 losing 37%, that had the best number. It may not have the best number in the future. So and it has a lot of volatility. I'm not really comfortable with that. The lowest performance was I'm doing this from memory, the target date fund. And the three-legged stool did pretty good because you're balancing a little bit every year and you're moving money around. And it's a little bit of what I want to do. But the Polaris plan did almost as well as being 100% in stock. And you cut out a lot of the volatility. And if you have a prolonged period, 3 to 5, even 8 years of down market like we had from 2000 to 2009, although the market had fully recovered before '08. But I'm just saying the cushion provides you that ability and that confidence and the ability to sleep at night, and which is where I came up with the name, to be able to be safe and secure, dramatically cut volatility. And the thing is, it hurts long-term performance only a teeny little bit when you're in retirement and taking out money. The cushion is a much bigger drag if you're 30 or 40 years of age because you're not taking money out. So the advantage of taking money out of bonds when stocks goes down is much smaller, and you're more interested in the overall long-term growth of your portfolio. At least I am. So the email, just to get you up to speed, the email said something about, Phil, it sounds like you didn't take out your fee when doing these calculations. And I gave them a much longer response than I'm going to give you, but he or she is correct that I did not take out the fee that I charge my clients. And the reason for that is that almost everything you need to know about how to do that is discussed in this show. Now, it's not discussed in one specific show because there's a lot to it. Like what types of bond index funds to buy, what type of stock index funds to buy, what are the allocations? And of course, if I'm working for somebody, there's going to be modifications and variations from the global idea that hopefully are more benefit to that individual client. But the purpose of the show is twofold. One, to provide general information to anyone that listens on how to invest better. And it's out there and it's free of charge. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. It's just my views on how the world works. So you can take all that information and pretty much effectively do the Polaris plan all by yourself. So I did not take out any kind of fee and represent it in that because when I explain how to do it, you can go do it. Will you have to listen to a lot of my shows? Yes. Will you have to understand a lot about how the markets work and how to set up an account? Yes. And so there's a lot of effort on your part. If you are someone who gets most of it or doesn't get it at all, but you just simply do not want to do the work, that's the kind of person that might sometimes do call me and say, Phil, I get it. I don't want to do it. I want to pay you to do it. So everybody has that choice. You have the information for free, or you could, as a nice perk for Phil, because this is my business, I could make money helping you do that. And so this person had asked, what would be the effect? Well, it's complicated because theoretically I should take out the fee every year and adjust it and then reevaluate where the $50,000 comes from. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot of free time to redo the whole model and the data set to figure that out. So I'm going to be kind of lame and not do it. But I made them an estimate. And of course, it hurts the overall performance. Now it becomes less than the total stock market. It still slightly beat the three-legged stool, and it definitely beat the target date fund, which again, I think was 2015. But I had to point out a couple of things to this listener who wrote the email, and I'm going to cover them with you here for a second. I did not take into account the compounding effect of reducing it by 1% every year. So that would actually make the performance slightly lower. I also did not adjust for the fact that accounts over 500,000, I charge a lower fee, and over $1 million, even lower still, because I was trying to make this very simple and easy. I also did not do anything for the fact that someone who hires me should get, I hope they get a little extra attention and time. And it's not something we're doing only once a year. And of course, their portfolio might be slightly different for other reasons, like if you have higher Social Security, or you have rent from a farm, or you own a duplex, or you have a pension, you have an annuity. Even though I wouldn't have sold it to you, you might have it, and you're stuck with it, and you're getting payments from that. Depending on your budget, your expenses, your sources of revenue, you might have flexibility on what you can do, and that changes the design of the plan. So I didn't take any of that into account. And, possibly saving you the time and headache and effort of doing it all yourself. But they are right. What I presented a couple of weeks ago did not include any fee reduction from me, because you, as a listener, can do pretty much what I described in that show on your own. Anyway, rambled on more about that than I wanted to. We'll take a quick break, and we'll come back and have an interview with ORAC.
My father, the man responsible for my education, taught me that Islam, rightly understood, is a religion and philosophy of peace. In fact, he said that for any society to be peaceful and prosperous, it had to institute the rule of God, or Sharia. I came to disagree with my father. It was a gradual process that started when I entered and lived in societies such as the Netherlands and the United States that applied man-made constitutions and laws. Both countries are peaceful and prosperous. I now disagree even more with my father that Islam is a religion of peace. When I look at the amount of security that is deployed tonight here, the amount of security that is deployed for the Richmond Marathon. 6 months ago, the Boston Marathon was bombed by two brothers who invoked the founding documents and the founding father of Islam. I disagree with my father when I look at the wanton killing of the Westgate Mall in Nairobi by Somali men invoking Allah and Muhammad to justify their horrid act. Kenya is the most hospitable country to Somalis fleeing their own country, so it distresses me even more. I disagree with my father when I look at the reports this week of 30 men and women worshipping in Iraq who are killed by a suicide bomber invoking the very same God and the very same prophet that they invoke. I disagree with my father when he says that Islam is a religion of peace. When I look at the 120,000 dead in Syria, Syria is now a stage of a proxy war between Islam's two most important and most influential nations, the Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Shia Islamic Republic of Iran. I disagree with my father that Islam is a religion of peace when I read about the almost daily reports of the destruction of churches, the pillaging of Christian property, the rape of Christian women, the terrible exodus of Christians and other religious minorities from Muslim countries. All this is done by men who invoke the founding father and founding documents of Islam. I disagree with my dear beloved father when I read about the teenage girl in Pakistan who's shot point blank in the head by a man invoking Allah and Muhammad because she wanted education. In the name of Allah and Muhammad, women are forbidden to drive. They're forbidden to own their own reproductive rights. They're forbidden to do anything unless they have permission from a male guardian. I disagree with my father that Islam is a religion of peace when I read these founding documents and I study the history and the example of the Prophet Muhammad. In there, I find an insistence of war and intolerance towards infidels, the hypocrites, those who associate God with others, homosexuals, women, and so on.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I am very excited to have with me today a blogger who goes by the name of ORAC. He's also known as David Gorski. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am good, and you have two big blogs here? Is that what I understand? You're part of the science-based medicine, and you have your own Respectful Insolence?
Well, yeah, I'm managing editor on science-based medicine, which doesn't actually mean a lot because they're all so good that I don't have to do much editing. But and I also have my own personal blog at Respectful Insolence. I only contribute about one post a week for science-based medicine, so that it's not that huge of an issue to have two.
Sure. You know, it makes it easy, of course, if you're the master editor to not have to do a whole lot of editing. But that's nice. Sounds like a nice title, though.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's also pretty wide. It's pretty widely trafficked. So it's been around for 10 years now. Yeah,
and if only it was as well read as some of the Woo sites, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's well read for a medical site, with a skeptical take on that sort of stuff. But compared to a lot of the Woo sites, yeah, it's outgunned.
Well, as my listeners know, I like applying skepticism and rational thought and, or using our mental skills to try to question everything to all kinds of subjects. Mine in particular is investments and finance, and yours is medicine. For the listeners, what is your background in medicine?
I am an MD, PhD. I'm a cancer surgeon who also runs a laboratory at Wayne State University. I'm based at the Karmanos Cancer Institute. How I came to be doing this is, now that I look at it, it's been almost 20 years. I don't know if you remember Usenet.
I am aware of it. I never used it, though. I don't know how.
That's kind of where I got my start. Basically arguing on Usenet from around, almost 20 years ago. So for about 5 years, that was all I did, and that as far as skepticism. And then for some reason in 2004, I decided on a whim one snowy, gray Saturday morning in December to start Respectful Insolence on Blogger, or Blogspot as it used to be called.
Right.
And I guess the rest is history.
The rest is history. And I don't know. I don't talk about it that much. We were talking pre-show. I used to have a blog for about 5 years, and it was awful. Much better at podcasting, I think, or at least not worse.
But I like to say I have a voice fit for blogging.
Well, I tell you what, I've been crashing the last couple of days reading multiple articles, particularly on the Respectful Insolence site, which, of course, the listeners just Google that or Google ORAC. It comes up pretty easy. And it's not 2 or 3 posts a day. It's a post every 2 or 3 days. They're lengthy and well-sourced, and I really enjoy going through them, so I think my listeners will like it.
Oh, I hope so. I'm always up for new readers. Let's see what happens.
Well, many, many good subjects that we can get through depending on time, but the one I wanted to make absolutely sure I got to, because it's a personal favorite of mine, and I know it's a favorite of yours, and I think it's going to really resonate with the listeners because they might recognize the person involved. Let's talk GOOP, shall we?
Okay. Yes. And, the funny thing is I'm relatively new to the whole GOOP thing. I only really started writing about it a few months ago. Before that, people like Tim Caulfield and Jen Gunter were the ones who really brought it to my attention. Jen Gunter did some fairly hilarious posts about Gwyneth Paltrow's promotion of, the Jade Eggs that you stick up, that women are supposed to stick up their vaginas. Of late, I have taken notice, and it's become a, if not frequent topic, a semi-regular topic.
Indeed, and I think it was Dr. Jen. I don't know what was her last name again.
Gunter.
You talked about her going to one of these GOOP health events.
She went to the one the weekend before last. It was in GOOP Health. It was their second conference. It was in New York. And yes, she did go. I'm kind of surprised they didn't prevent her from going.
I thought it was fascinating. You had the throwback to PZ and Richard Dawkins going to the creationism movie way back
that was
time.
10 years, and yes, that was 10 years ago. When I was looking up those posts that I wrote about it, they were from 2008.
I sometimes get surprised. I've been doing this stuff so long, and obviously you would be too. And I thought it was fun when she went to this event and she wrote down some things that she overheard, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And I made this list, and I was like, okay, I got to pick out just a couple of best ones. But how do you filter this?
Yeah,
down?
there is so much as the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and so we have a couple here that I'm just going to randomly pick. We don't need evidence-based medicine if we have experiences. God has pure healing energy, and you did save the best for last. School shootings happen because the kids who did the shooting were disconnected from cords of love.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you?
I find that one particularly despicable.
I think so.
I mean, because it kind of implies that, first, that, love could save the day, and second, most of these school shootings, yes, they're disturbed individuals, but whether they're disturbed because they're disconnected from the cords of love or their parents didn't love them enough, it's kind of blaming the parents.
Yeah, and of course, if they just went to a GOOP health event for $2,000, right, it'd be all better.
Well, you can do the 650 tier too, which I found out later is what Dr. Gunter did. I thought she got the 2,000 one, but she was a little more frugal than that, and wisely so, I think.
Yeah, it's amazing to me that these events are as big as they are, and they draw people, and they do. I mean, this was a pretty big deal, right?
It sold out like a month or two before it was supposed to happen, because when I wrote about it, I think in December, and at the time, I'm pretty sure it was sold out.
And how many people did they have? Do you happen to know that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I would have to go back to those. But I do like the part though where they say, "Oh, but they got $3,000 worth of swag," and my response to that is, retail people. It's not like wholesale. I'm sure it's nowhere near worth $3,000.
Yeah, $3,000 of retail, which theoretically is $1,200 if the stuff had value and you wanted it and needed it and could use it, and it actually worked.
Or it probably cost like a few hundred tops to manufacture. So
right, of course the manufacturer has to make their profits, but yeah, it's all given away. And so this GOOP thing, and that's run by Gwyneth Paltrow, who is she's got what degrees again in medicine?
None that I'm aware true.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing. You kind of have to, at some level, admire it in that at least her skill as a business person.
Oh, I indeed do. Just
she
as
started this as like just an online mailing list, and now it's this multi-million-dollar business that with all this publicity, it's like. But I think she said she has like 150 employees. It's like insane.
That is insane. And even as we were trying to schedule this interview for the last couple of weeks, she happened to be on the Colbert Show. Or I guess it's Late Night with Colbert or something like that. But it's basically the simplified version of the Colbert Report. And I was so pissed off, I had to change the channel.
I was disappointed. Look, I know it's entertainment. I know it's show business. I didn't expect that Colbert is like pristine or pure or anything, but he had been doing these hilarious parodies of Goop that he called Covetton House for like almost 2 years, for 2 years. I think he started them in 2015, and they were spot on, and they skewered the whole Goop phenomenon hilariously. And then suddenly, here Colbert was playing kissy face with Gwyneth Paltrow, and yes, he did sort of make fun of her, but none of the jokes were all that particularly cutting in the sketch that they did. And then the interview afterwards, like I said, he had his nose so far up her posterior that he could see her uvula from the other side.
It was pretty bad because, like I said, I changed the channel immediately as soon as I heard that she was even going to be on. But listeners, you can do the same. You can go to Respectful Insolence and look up Gwyneth Paltrow and Colbert, and you can see the post about this.
And I included the YouTube videos.
Indeed. I enjoyed the multiple Covington House episodes. And like you said, they are biting and harsh and to the point, and point out the ridiculousness of everything she does. And then poof, she's on the show, and he's, like you said, a few jokes. I mean, it took a couple of little jabs, poke, but nothing real serious.
I think like the worst thing he did was like he made fun of like the binaural sound thing that they had going at the Goop conference, where he was like making whale noises in one ear. That was funny, but it was not. It was like poking gentle fun. It wasn't particularly biting.
Well, and he did mention the egg a couple of times, the Jade Egg.
Yes.
Just because that's kind of humorous, but not really into it. So that was, go read that, listeners. It's a very good, and you can skip the part with Gwyneth if you can't stomach it, and I would understand, but at least watch the Covington House ones.
I mean, on the interview afterward, he was like basically promoting the Goop magazine, with her love and sex issue, and talking about her marriage and all of that. And look, again, I know it's show business. It's late night. He's not going to attack a guest.
Right.
What I just wish he had done is just say no.
Yeah.
And not had her on at all. Because I know once you've agreed to have someone on a show like that, you're not going to attack them. It's not how those shows work.
Yeah. It just still made me sad. But
makes me wonder if like someone in the network wanted to promote Gwyneth or something, or she knew someone, and
I was even thinking a little more conspiracy theory, which I don't like to do, but it's fun every once in a while, that maybe her attorneys had contacted them and said, you got to stop what you're doing, and they said, well, why don't we just have you on?
Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know though that anything he did was like libelous or anything, or slanderous. Yeah. And it's parody, but I know lawyers can make trouble.
Yeah. Another topic that has come up recently, and I think it's new. I had not heard of it in years past. Raw water. What can you tell me about that?
Well, it's basically raw, unfiltered water straight from the source. I mean, the funny thing is the idea is that filtering the water or otherwise pure. Well, first, they hate any sort of chemicals, so obviously treating it with chlorine or any other chemicals
and so
kill dangerous bacteria.
God
is pure evil. But then the other idea is that somehow filtering the water kills it. It's like not living anymore. which of course I would argue is exactly what you want in your water. You don't want too much living stuff in there. That's why there are like safe levels of bacteria that the EPA and the World Health Organization say, the water should not have more than this amount of bacteria in it, or, this amount of, it's like, I mean, there was a line in there from one of the stories that, like, if you left the water too long at room temperature, it would turn green.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I would argue that's not a good thing.
Well, I mean, back thousands of years ago, as humans, we were compelled to drink from a pond of stagnant water.
Mm-hmm. And there are all sorts of, I mean, all I could think of is things like Giardia, which, is a parasite that can be living in what appears to be pristine water. Like, this is why campers, various other people who were forced to drink this sort of water carry filters.
They carry filters and pills, or they boil the water for a while.
Right.
I couldn't help but think of tapeworm. That's something that's going to be fun to get from the water. And of course, you get this attitude, and I've seen this on friends' Facebook walls. Someone will say something like, "I don't eat any food that contains chemicals."
Oh, yes. Well, I hate to tell you.
Well, and it's the same thing with raw water, because they don't want to have anything with chemicals. Well, water is in itself a chemical.
Everything in the world is made up of, I should say all matter is basically chemicals.
Yeah, and anything beyond the atomic size.
I mean, obviously they're conflating two different things. They're just using the word chemical to mean quote unquote artificial chemicals. Although the dividing line between what is an artificial, quote unquote artificial chemical versus like a naturally occurring chemical is not always that clear either. It's just a very scientifically ignorant thing to say or think.
Well, I mean, obviously my go-to is arsenic is 100% natural.
Mm-hmm. So is if I recall, strychnine.
Yeah, snake venom is all natural too.
Yes, there are all sorts of natural toxins out there.
What could go wrong?
But it's one of those things.
Another fun story you had lately is apparently attempts to or successful at getting funding for Medicaid to allow acupuncture. What's going on there?
Yes, well, basically, as you know, we have an opioid crisis or epidemic, with the number of people dying of overdoses or suffering from opioid addiction, at a very high level. Unfortunately, that, we do need to find some sort of thing, we do need to find a way to reduce the number of people who are addicted to opioids and reduce the number of people who are dying from opioids. Unfortunately, people who believe in unscientific medicine or pseudoscience have seen the opioid epidemic as an opening to say, hey, acupuncture, hey, all these other unscientific and pseudoscientific treatments, these are the answer, or they're a big part of the answer to the opioid crisis. They can sound plausible if you don't know about what they're talking about.
Well, and it's funny because in a way, I'm almost open to the idea. It scares me to say that. I fully accept that acupuncture has no real value, but could one argue successfully that by using acupuncture, which is meaningless, if that stops someone from becoming addicted to opioids, it's an equitable trade-off?
Except there's no real good evidence that it will.
Well, there is that.
There's the problem there.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, it's a fantasy.
But in any case, people who are advocates of integrative medicine take a look at, take a look at the opioid crisis, and they go, well, and basically they try to claim all non-pharmacologic interventions for pain as their own, as exclusively theirs, when that's not the case, and there's no reason a priori to think that some things that have been shown to have some value in pain, such as certain kind of physical therapy, in some cases massage, in other cases various types of exercise. There's no reason to consider those like alternative or integrative. That I've never seen a compelling argument why that should be so. The problem also is that when in claiming these non-pharmacologic interventions for pain, they also bring in the woo along with it. Even though I kind of half joked about saying, sure, let them go through the hell of getting Medicaid reimbursement. Because it's half tempting to say, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
But the problem is, of course, if Medicaid reimburses for it, that is something that people view as a mark of legitimacy. The government has said this is something we will pay for.
Well, it's just like, when insurance companies pay for chiropractors and states license chiropractors, it becomes legitimized. It becomes an actual thing. And maybe to undo a pinched nerve, maybe, but when they start talking about...
No, I was going to say, in terms of chiropractors, we've pretty much lost the battle. They're licensed in all 50 states, and a lot of insurance companies will pay for them. However, when chiropractors restrict themselves to musculoskeletal disorders, I kind of look at them as poorly trained physical therapists,
Right.
It's like they may do some good for, like, spinal stuff, as long as they restrict themselves to that.
But they almost never do.
But they don't. That's why I also say, that's why the second part of my saying is I'll say that they're poorly trained physical therapists with delusions of grandeur. Because they think they can treat all sorts of other things that have nothing to do with the spine or musculoskeletal system.
Yeah, like, autism or asthma.
allergies or,
Yeah, and I've seen those. I've been at, even just a home show where the people are selling the house vacuum systems and heating and air conditioning, and then there's a chiropractor there with a sign listing all the diseases they can fix with adjustments. It's unbelievable. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is. Another topic, which is not something you've written about recently, but I think it might be of interest to you. It popped into my head a few years ago. We had an exchange student visit us from Chile, and we had to go get her a couple of vaccinations to make her up to date with the U.S. List of vaccinations that are required for high school. The nurse that was giving her the shots at the clinic happened to mention that as long as you have the proper balance in your diet, you can't get cancer. What do you think of that?
One of the things I think alternative medicine is all about is a desire for control. Health problems can be random. Health problems can strike people who seem to be healthy, and it's a desire for control. So there is in the alternative medicine world, there are strains of thought that you don't need vaccines, for instance, because if you only eat the right foods, do the right exercises, take the right supplements, your immune system will be so awesome that you can't get sick from, these particular diseases. And yes, there's even a strain of thought that if you eat the right foods and live the right lifestyle, you can't get cancer. Now, yes, diet matters. Yes, there are certain types of food and certain types of diet that predispose to cancer. A lot of it, of course, is obesity. Obesity is a risk factor for cancer. So if you're eating a diet and leading a lifestyle that leads you to be obese, you'll be at a higher risk for cancer. But if you fix that and lose weight and get into better shape, and it will lower your risk of cancer, but it will never lower that risk to zero or anywhere near zero. Perfectly healthy, people who are not obese and who are in good physical shape get cancer all the time, especially as they age, because it's a disease, primarily a disease of aging. And there's a really pernicious dark side to that idea, which is that, well, if you get sick, if you get cancer, you must not be doing something right.
Yeah, now you're going into the secret zone here.
But it's a very strong undercurrent in a lot of these things, this sort of thinking, and it's kind of how would I put it, religious or moralistic, in that the implication is that righteous people do not get sick.
Right.
It's only people who are not righteous, who do not do the right things, do not eat the right foods, who get sick, which is nonsense.
Well, it's funny to tie that in, and it's something that my listeners may know, but my wife has bipolar, and one of the things that helped her out of religion as members of her church telling her to stop taking her medicine, there was a little voice in the back of her head going, now that can't be right. I mean, we know science works. I mean, it's not perfect, but unfortunately, mental health disorders are difficult. They're complicated.
Right. And unfortunately, psychiatry remains one of the areas that's probably the least firmly scientifically based, although they're getting better and trying to get better. But, that's because it's so complicated. Another
recent article you had was on right to try. And this, I have to admit, was new to me. So I'm sure it's going to be new to a lot of my listeners. Walk us through what is right to try and why it might be a problem.
Well, here's the idea. First, I'll say how advocates sell or promote the idea, or how they represent it. The idea is that a terminally ill patient should have the quote unquote right to try experimental therapeutics that might help them, which is a hard idea to argue against in the abstract, or as a general principle. The problem, of course, is when you get into the weeds and see what the whole right to try thing really means. So it started, I believe, in 2014 with Colorado. But there's two separate issues. There's the state right to try versus the federal right to try that they're trying to pass now. The state right to try started out in a few states, and I think Colorado was the first to pass it, with the idea that a patient with a terminal illness has the right to try any medication that has passed phase 1 clinical trials. Anyone who knows anything about clinical trials know that phase 1 clinical trials do not demonstrate a medication to be safe. It's like the lowest bar possible. Phase 1 clinical trials are designed to find the worst toxicities, to find the maximum tolerated dose, and to come up with an estimate of what the best dose would be for the next round of clinical trials that actually look for efficacy. That's the other thing. Phase 1 clinical trials are not designed even to test efficacy. So using that as like the standard, that it has to have passed phase 1 and is still in development is dangerous. And it's and I've heard right to try advocates say, oh, well, we only recommend it, or the law would only allow it for drugs shown to be safe. No, that's nonsense. A drug that's passed phase 1 has not been shown to be safe. It's just been shown we found the worst toxicities.
So it's been shown.
We're only looking at like 20. We're only looking at maybe 30 patients that these trials are.
And so at this point, passing phase 1, would it be fair to say it's been shown to not be immediately deadly? I mean,
it's been shown to be not so dangerous or deadly that you see like horrible effects in like 30 if you give it to 30 people.
And how long could phase 1 last?
Oh, they're usually a few months, maybe a year. It depends on the drug.
Sure.
And how fast you can recruit patients.
So it's only shown that it hasn't really killed or really materially harmed in a very short period of time a very small number of people.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's safe.
Right. Now here's the other thing. All of the right to try laws in the various states, and I believe the last count I checked, it was 38 states had passed them, are based on a template that was written by the Goldwater Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. And they all contain certain elements. That phase 1 is one element, that it has to have passed phase 1. Another element is to basically shield doctors and drug companies from any liability for doing right to try. Another thing is it says explicitly that no third party payers have to pay for it, and no one and the drug company is free to negotiate whatever price it wants for to let these drugs out. Which okay, I would never argue. I don't argue that insurance companies should have to pay for this because they're experimental drugs. However, the problem is there's no other mechanism to help people pay for it. So basically, inequitable. Only people with resources could access right to try, or people who are good at social media raising of money access right to try. Another more pernicious thing that people don't always realize is that it basically could be interpreted, if you read some of these laws, that if someone suffers a complication from a right to try drug, the insurance company will not have to pay for it.
Oh.
And most of these laws also say that the patient's estate could be liable for right to try charges. Because, yes, remember, these are terminally ill patients, and many of them will die.
Yeah.
In the time frame that they're doing right to try, and if they happen to rack up large charges or go bankrupt trying to pay for right to try. Now, granted, I highly doubt that any drug company would actually go after the estate of a patient because it would be such horrendous PR.
That'd be worse than Pharma Bro.
But the idea is basically you're on your own, and we're cutting the FDA out, which is actually the point. The whole idea behind right to try is not so much to help terminally ill patients, because we actually already do have programs called expanded use or compassionate use that the FDA has, that something like 98+% of the applications are approved, but there's still FDA oversight. The idea behind right to try is to cut the FDA out of the process. That's quite intentional. It's part of the whole idea that government regulation is bad and that the government should not come between the patient and whatever the drug company wants to sell. I've said these laws are mainly designed to weaken the FDA, using terminally ill patients as the face of it, because arguing against right to try in general is perceived by the public as basically like arguing against mom, apple pie, and the American flag. It's when you say you oppose right to try, the usual reaction is that people look at you like you just proposed killing puppies.
Yeah, I could see how that's all wrapped up very cleverly, very very slick marketing. You had me concerned as soon as you said the word libertarian.
They're already moving beyond. The federal right to try is really interesting. I haven't checked what the latest version is, because there's supposedly a new version that they're considering that the FDA is not so opposed to. But the version that was currently being considered in the House after having passed the Senate had a provision that the FDA, that in deciding whether or not to approve a drug, the FDA could not consider the results of people who took the drug under right to try. So in other words, if a bunch of patients took a right to try drug, or took a drug under right to try, and a bunch of them suffered horrific complications, the FDA could not consider those complications in its deliberations over whether to approve the drug.
Now, to me, that's beyond insidious, because the one thing I was thinking about before you even mentioned it was, well, if these people are going to die anyway, and of course, unfortunately, their estates may be wiped out and it's not covered if they have complications, which is bad enough, maybe, just maybe, there's some argument for the good of society, because you can at least find out maybe quicker that the medicine is not good for people in general. And so those people that unfortunately did die would at least provide us with information and knowledge. And now you're saying that they're specifically, or could be, blocked from considering that information.
Yeah, I mean, basically that's it that's in the federal version of the right to try.
And I can only imagine, and correct me here if you think I'm wrong, that is inserted by the pharmaceutical industry because they are willing to take money from people who are dying, but they don't want it to hurt the prospects.
To be honest, the pharmaceutical industry is not particularly enthusiastic about right to try. For instance, PhRMA, I forget what it stands for, but it's the pharmaceutical industry trade group, a PH capital RMA or whatever, however it goes.
Yeah,
pretty much neutral or very lukewarm to the whole right to try concept. And I think the reason is pharmaceutical companies want stability and predictability. And they also view FDA approval as evidence or for a marketing purpose, like a badge of trust, that their drugs have passed, rigorous testing and that, therefore you as the consumer can trust them. And yes, there have been lapses, and yes, the FDA isn't perfect, and yes, there are problems that come out with some drugs, after they've been approved. But in general, the FDA does a pretty good job. In reality, most pharmaceutical companies are not too fond of right to try. They're, because a lot of times experimental drugs are in very short supply, and they just make enough to be able to do the clinical trials to get FDA approval because it's expensive,
yeah.
difficult to make. And if they're suddenly having to fend off, or they're having to answer right to try requests, it puts them in a bit of a bind.
Well, I think
basically now they can just make the FDA the bad guy.
Yeah, I think you
can say, okay, the FDA says we can't do it.
Yeah, you're convincing me. And the other thing that popped in my head while you were talking about this, from a economic standpoint, the FDA creates quite a barrier to entry because you have to have significant attorneys and money to get a drug through all the stages. Mm-hmm. If you only have to pass the first stage, what prevents people who are practicing woo to show something doesn't kill somebody, and now they can sell that for a fortune?
Theoretically, that would be possible. I don't know how easy or widespread that would be to do, because most people who sell that sort of stuff wouldn't even bother to do a phase 1 clinical trial. I could see, for instance, where this would really benefit the stem cell quack clinics. They could just do a phase 1 trial and then say, well, we're still trying to get FDA approval for it, and then just sell it,
I understand. Real quick, because I know your time is limited and almost running out. You can talk about it as long as you want to, or just make it short and run away. Should we vaccinate?
Obviously, the answer is yes.
Okay. We had to cover that. I know you cover it all the time.
Oh, it's probably the most common thing I write about.
That's why I saved it to the end. I mean, anyone that reads your stuff hears about it all the time. But I cannot believe it's still an issue. And yes, it still needs your attention.
And it probably will until the day I either retire from blogging or drop dead, unfortunately.
Well, David Gorski, also known as ORAC, thank you so much for spending time with us on the Phil Ferguson Show. And thank you for your efforts to try to educate the population. And listeners, if you want to know more about his material, you can find him at Science Based Medicine or Respectful Insolence.
The history of discovery, particularly cosmic discovery, but discovery in general, scientific discovery, is one where at any given moment there's a frontier. And there tends to be an urge for people, especially religious people, to assert that across that boundary into the unknown lies the handiwork of God. This shows up a lot. Newton even said it. He had his laws of gravity and motion, and he was explaining the moon and the planet. He was there. He doesn't mention God for any of that. And then he gets to the limits of what his equations can calculate. So can't quite figure this out. Maybe God steps in and makes it right every now and then. That's where he invoked God. And Ptolemy, he bet on the wrong horse, but he was a brilliant guy. He formulated the geocentric universe with Earth in the middle. This is where we got epicycles and the machinations of the heavens. There was still a mystery to him. He looked up and uttered the following words: when I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies. These are the planets going through retrograde and back. The mysteries of the earth. When I trace at my pleasure the windings to and fro of the heavenly bodies, I no longer touch earth with my feet. I stand in the presence of Zeus himself and take my fill of ambrosia. What he did was he didn't invoke Zeus to account for the rock that he's standing on or the air he's breathing. It was this point of mystery, and in gets invoked God. This, over time, has been described by philosophers as the God of the gaps. if that's if that's where you're going to put your God in this world, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. If that's how you're going to invoke God. If God is the mystery of the universe. These mysteries, we're tackling these mysteries one by one. If you're going to stay religious at the end of the conversation, God has to be more to you than just where science has yet to tread. So to the person who says, maybe dark matter is God, if the only reason why you're saying it's because it's a mystery, then get ready to have that undone.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
Well, I do hope that you enjoyed listening to ORAC and all the fun things that he's talking about, vaccines and anti-vaxxers and all that fun stuff. I was having a little fun on my Facebook about flat earthers because Elon Musk, of course, just shot his car into space and included a dude, a dummy, a mannequin in an astronaut suit and with lots of cameras. And so you could see his car floating around the earth. There's photos and video. So if you have any friends, which would be really sad, that are flat earthers, even if they're fucking around and joking about it, have them watch the videos of Elon Musk's car floating around the earth. If they still say it's a conspiracy, well, I guess you should just probably unfriend them because they have issues and they can't focus on reality. And I don't have time for that. No one's got time for that. Another thing I do want to cover, and I'm putting it at the end of the show just kind of as a way to show, at least in this specific instance, the value of this topic. And I'm being a little cheeky. But the stock market had a big correction on Friday and the Monday before, and one day it went down to 666. And I love the fact that the media could not bring themselves to say 666. I mean, it was technically 665.75. And so if you're not going to give the exact number and you're going to round it, it's 666. But they would say 665 or more than 665 or more than 660 points or almost 700 points. But they would not say 666. Cracked me up. I'm sure somebody did somewhere, but most of them did not. And I didn't want to put it at the beginning of the show because I want to emphasize I don't give a shit. And if it weren't for the fact that I do this every day, the investment advising, and I talk to clients every day, I probably wouldn't even, I mean, I guess I would have. It was a pretty big drop. I don't care. I really, truly, genuinely don't care. And what you should have is a portfolio that's designed properly so that you don't care either, because there ain't shit you can do about it. And if you start doing something about it, you're going to have transactional costs and create tax consequences. So even if you're right and you got out before it dropped and then you got back in after it dropped, you still have a lot of taxes to pay, and that can eat up a whole big chunk of how clever you were. The other thing that I do know from experience that humans tend to look at the correction from, in this case, the highs that they had a few days before. So just for reference, as of right now, the stock market is down 0.3% for the entire year to date of 2018. It did lose in a couple of days, I don't know, 6-7%, something like that. I don't know. But it also ran up 6-7% in the preceding month, which is nice until it goes away. But if you're looking at your performance daily or weekly, stop. Don't do it. There's nothing you can do to change it. You're just going to stress yourself out, and it's not adding anything to your performance. It's not improving your life in any way. It's just creating stress and anxiety, and investing is not supposed to do that. So I expect that I will get very few calls on this from clients, because we often have very long talks about long-term investing, long-term performance. And if you're not long-term, if you're a few years from retirement or even 8 or 10 years from retirement, we should have a cushion set up for you that makes you comfortable, that makes you know that is probably not going to change your retirement date. And if it does, it's not going to be material. And if you're concerned that it's not conservative enough, we can change the long-term plan for you. But I did have one person ask, what are you doing to protect me from the downside? I'm doing nothing. That's my plan. So if there's any confusion about that, I apologize, but we go straight into the drop. Now, back in 2000, 99, 2000, obviously the market was insane when it was making 20, 30% a year, and we made some adjustments. But when you have the last 3 years are 1, 14, and 22%, I don't think it's pants on fire. I did say in January that if you're 10, 12, 14 years from retirement, you should consider making your cushion 1 year bigger. This, again, is part of this information that I'm giving to you if you're following my methodology at home. Take a step towards conservative because you made a lot of money in the last 3 years. You made a lot of money in the last 9 years. So it's reasonable. It's prudent to be a little more conservative. But if you're wanting weekly, daily, monthly adjustments from Phil, you got the wrong guy. That's not what I do. And the big reason is you have to know when to get out. You have to know when to get in. You have to pay tax consequences, transactional fees. And odds are you're going to dramatically underperform in the long term. And that's what I care about, making the most money in the long term. All of the studies that I've seen is that the most reliable way to do that is to be invested in the long run. So you add money, you add more money, you keep adding money, you get a pay increase, you add money. And what happens in the next year or two, even if it's a 20 or 30% drop, I say keep adding money because I don't know what's going to happen. It reminds me, a couple of years ago, I went to my first investment planner, investment advisor conference ever for the industry. And I don't see a motivation to go back, but it was very fascinating. I learned a couple of things. One is that a lot of investment advisors use what they call a money manager. So you might hire the investment advisor and they're your point of contact and they're your expert, but they see themselves much more as a salesperson because they probably came from the industry. They probably started with a big brokerage firm and worked the back room, worked the phones, moved up, finally got to contact customers, had to make cold calls. And to be successful at that, you have to sell. You don't necessarily have to know how the markets work. You don't have to know how things work. You have to sell. You sell, you make money. You sell, you make money. And so even when they finally leave a big brokerage firm and they start their own company, they often are sales oriented, which makes a lot of sense because if you're a good salesperson, you can make way more money in this industry than if you're a mediocre or sucky salesperson. Whether I'm a good salesperson or not, I don't know. I'll let you decide. I don't particularly like it. And I have the luxury of, I started my business while having a very nice full-time job, and it kind of grew on its own without me needing to go sell much. But they often still don't know much about how the market works, so they hire what's called a money manager, which is someone who's an expert on how to manage your portfolio. So you may pay the advisor 1% or slightly less or significantly more. Sometimes I've heard people tell me that they pay 1.5%, 2%. I've even heard 2.5%, particularly if you're in a big city like San Francisco, Chicago, New York, LA, Miami, Dallas, that kind of thing, because the expenses to hold an office are very, very high. And then you may pay an additional fee to a money manager, which might be 10, 15, 25, 30 basis points. And 30 basis points means 0.3%. It's 300 out of the 100 that make up 1 percentage point. So it's called basis points. So if you have that, make sure that you're aware that the person you're talking to is not the person that is calculating and figuring out where your investments go. So when I went to this conference, I learned about that. I didn't know about that. It's sometimes almost embarrassing, I guess, at things that I don't know about how the industry works because I don't give a shit. Just like the stock market dropping 10% or 7% in a couple days, I don't care. That's not what I do. I don't have a money manager. I think it's kind of comical that the person that you've hired doesn't know enough to be able to help manage your accounts. I see that as a problem. It may not be a problem. But I was sitting at this conference at dinner one night, and the topic came around. And the reason I'm telling you this story is I've been telling this to people over the last few days, and someone said, I don't think you've ever told this on the show, Phil. You've got to cover this great story. And I'm sitting at this dinner table, and the topic comes up where the advisors are all sharing with each other what percentage of their clients did they lose in 2008. And someone says, well, I lost 18%. And someone said, I lost 24%. And someone said, I lost 30% of my customers. And they go around the table and they get to me, and I'm just kind of staring at them. And I said, I guess I don't understand the question. And one of the other advisors said, well, if you had 100 clients at the beginning of 08, and then you had 80 clients at the end of 08, you would have lost 20% of your clients. And I was like, motherfucker, I can do the math. It's not the math that's the problem. I don't understand. Okay, fine. I guess my answer is 0. I lost 0% of my customers in 08 when the market went down 37%. And they couldn't accept that. And I couldn't accept why would they lose a fourth to a third of their clients in 1 year? What the fuck are you doing? And that's when they started telling me about these different money managers. And a lot of money managers have this program where they sell you the phrase, you're going to make most of the money when the market goes up, and you're going to lose a lot less when the market goes down, because they're going to protect you, because they're really smart. They're super smart. And that's why you're paying 1.5% for the advisor, and then another 25 to 30 basis points, another 2 to 0.3% to the money manager to protect you. And so I was like, well, how did that work out? What did it work? And of course, they're like, well, no, it didn't quite work that way. So when the market went down 37%, maybe the clients didn't lose 37%, but they only lost 25 or 30. Well, if you're selling the idea that you might only lose 10 or 15 and your client loses 25 or 30, which is still less than 37%, you've set up a false expectation and they're going to bolt. And so they wanted to know, how come I didn't lose any clients? Not that they believed what I was saying, but they said, how come you didn't lose any clients? And I said, because I tell people, and I'm going to reiterate it here, if you are 100% in the U.S. stock market using stock index funds via Vanguard, the way I suggest, if the market falls 40% in 2018, note, not a prediction, but if the market falls 40%, just to make an example, you will, during this calendar year, lose 40%. There's no fucking sugarcoating. There's no dancing around to try to avoid it. You are going to lose 40% of your money. If you have $1 million at the beginning of the year, you will have $600,000 on paper at the end of the year. That's how this works. However, if you are a long-term investor, when the market goes up 22% like it did last year, you are going to make 22%. And one of the things I run across all the time, and I know it's going to happen, and it's something where I've talked about market performance in the last couple episodes, and I'm just going to touch on it again because it kind of fits with this thought process, is how are you doing now? And I'll run into people who have sat down with their advisor and said, oh, no, Phil, I know I'm doing pretty well. I just met with my advisor, and I'm trying to get a number for reference here. And they say, I know that I've made 9% per year for the last 5 years. I just met with my advisor. The long-term norm is 10%. I'm making 9. I'm doing pretty good. And I go, well, that's great. But the market in the last 5 years has had an average return of 15.55%, ending 12/31 of 17. 15.55%. If you're making 9, you're underperforming by 6.5 percentage points per year, assuming you're 100% in stocks. What in the hell is going on with your portfolio? You need to figure that out, because if we go back to a normal return of 10%, which is what I would expect in the long run, and you're still underperforming by 6%, 6.5%, you're going to make 3 to 4 when the market's making 10. It's going to be really hard to become wealthy and to get to retirement if you're making 3 to 4% per year in the long run. So you need to understand, And this also goes if we get a time period where the average 3-year performance is -5. If you're losing 10% per year, you're still underperforming the market, even if it's down. So anyway, it was just a fun thing for me to be at this dinner table and have all these people talking about what percentage of their clients that they lose, which means that they're selling. They're pitching something that they either know or don't know. They can't and is not going to be able to deliver. And when the customers find out they didn't get what they're promised, they bolt. And so when people hire me, I'm very clear. And just like I'm very clear in this podcast, when the market goes down, you will lose money. That's why you have some of your money in the cushion. And that is the part that protects you and allows you in retirement. You have bond dividends and stock dividends. And if necessary, you can sell some of the bonds. And you have different types of bonds because different types of bonds react differently to different types of situations. Anyway, just a fun thought on that. One last thing on Stitcher. I have a review and I want to read that for you. And this is from Matthew. Oh, look, a name I can read. Thank you, Matthew, for that. It's a 5-star review. Thank you. Excellent financial and atheist information. Phil provides a wealth of knowledge on all aspects of financial products, from 401ks, IRAs, annuities, mutual funds, Bitcoins with their risks, and retirement recommendations. He has also a variety of guests on his show, covering a wide range of topics from atheism to volunteering to investment experts, such as a real estate specialist. Thank you, Matthew, for that kind word. And since Matthew mentioned Bitcoin, I just want to point out that when I did my double whammy Bitcoin episode in late December 22nd, just a few days after the peak high of 20,000, Bitcoin has fallen all the way to 6,000 and maybe has bounced back to 8 or 9. I haven't even looked today. I don't know. I kind of hear things. I'm not trying to follow it. I get tempted to kind of go, I was right. See, I told you I was right. And maybe I just did that. But I don't want to rest on that because Bitcoin can easily go back to 10, 12, 15 if the supply and demand is there for people to buy it and run up the price. I don't really care what the price of Bitcoin is. I didn't care when it was $800. I only cared when it was pushing 20 because I started getting asked by like the cashier at the grocery store. And it had become a universal public phenomenon and everybody wanted to know about it. So I dug in deeper and did a show on it. I don't really care what the price of Bitcoin is, although I have to admit, as a human, that part of me feels pretty happy that I'm vindicated, at least currently, that the price is down. If the price at some point goes over 20, 25,000, 30,000, I will feel kind of bad because I thought it would go down and it went up. But it won't change my recommendation. It won't change my opinion that you should not own it. It doesn't generate any revenue. It doesn't have a yield. It doesn't have any kind of an intrinsic value. It is a horrible investment. And if pushed, it's a horrible currency. Anyway, I'm going to move on from that. Coming up in a few weeks, I will be at NanoCon in Nashville. So please come visit me there. I think I will be giving a very short TED-like talk on Bitcoin, which I got to figure out how to make it only 18 minutes. And I will also be presenting a workshop, which will be not really pre-planned, but a place for people to ask questions. And if no one has questions, I'll have some topics I can discuss. That won't be a problem for me to talk. So I'll be at NanoCon, and then at the end of March, into April 1st. I love it, April Fool's Day. I will be at the American Atheist Conference in OKC, Oklahoma City, and I hope to see you at one or both of those events. And as my plans firm up through the rest of the year, I'll let you know about those. And one last topic for people who travel. This is my request from the listeners. I am considering a family vacation, and I'm looking for suggestions, recommendations. Now, keep in mind, we already kind of know the general area where we're going. So we're going to go to Poland because my son spent a year there and he wants to show us around. And we want him as an expert on Poland to show us around and do some touristy things in Poland. So if you know anything in Poland, we're going to go to Warsaw. We're going to go to Bydgoszcz, I think is how you pronounce the city. And then we'll hit some cities in the south, and we'll definitely go to Auschwitz. After that, we're probably going to go to Prague, Vienna. My daughter wants us to go to the historic sites for the Sound of Music. So if you know of any Sound of Music tours. And then we'll probably drop down into northern Italy. Definitely go to Venice. I've not been there. I've been to Italy twice. This will be my third time I finally get to go to Venice. We might even take a ferry over and hit the best beaches in all of Italy in a little place called Croatia. So we might do that. We might go up into the Dolomites, the Italian Alps. We might see some cities in the extreme northern area of Italy. And maybe, just maybe, and this is kind of fantasy, and I don't know how I can fit all this, so we got to make choices. We might go all the way over to the other side of Italy and go to an area called Cinque Terre, which is the Five Lands. It's 5 little cities tucked in mountains along the coast of the Mediterranean. Absolutely gorgeous. It's a place I've been wanting to go to for years. But if you have ideas, suggestions, an Airbnb that you stayed at, a hotel that you stayed at, a tour that you took, a city that I haven't mentioned that you think I must absolutely go to because I'm right there, I would love to have your input. Send me an email, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and give me recommendations and suggestions. And be creative. Whatever it is you liked, if there was a road to avoid, a certain type of train to take, airline companies, do you love or hate Ryanair in case we go between cities on airplanes? I'm open for suggestions. Anyway, enough about that. I do hope to see you at a conference sometime soon. Until then, ciao.
are not appealing. In fact, I'm starting to get the uh-oh feeling. And my mama said my special parts are just for me. So why in the world are you trying to creep?
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
To try and touch my square takes a lot of nerve. Who do you think you are, you freaky deaky perv? There's a dude with some candy in a shady old van. I think he wants to mess with my purity plan.
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square.
My square's not a circle or a period or dot. It's just my one little very old spot. So keep your grubby little dirty little hands off me while I want you to respect my privacy. I just want to be left all alone, so step off me and go back home. I'll tell you again, if you're not aware that this is my own no-no square.
Stop! Don't touch me there. This is my no-no square. Stop! Don't touch me there.